Have you ever wondered how tall the world's tallest man is? Or who has the world's longest mustache? Or who has twirled the most hula hoops at once? Probably not. But just in case you ever did, you don't have to wonder, because there's something called the Guinness Book of World Records. It's been in existence since 1951, allegedly, as a way to settle barroom arguments. New editions, though, are still being published every year, even in this age of Google. I had a copy myself when I was in elementary school, and I just found it fascinating. Like, how else would we know that the world's tallest man is Sultan Kürsin from Turkey, who stands 8 feet, 2.8 inches tall? Look at that guy's hands. The world's longest mustache is owned by Ram Singh Chauhan from India. It is 14 feet long. The most hula hoops twirled at once, 200, by the Somali-Australian performer Marawa Ibrahim. I mean, there's all kinds of records in there. Most of them have to do with a choice the person made. Like, they decided what they were going to do. Like, someone decided to have the world's longest fingernails, a combined length of 28 feet, 4.5 inches. Or somebody wanted to set the land speed record of 490 miles per hour. Pretty sure that was set on I-75 the other day. Or somebody wanted to own the world's largest collection of hamburger memorabilia, 3,724 items, by Florida's own, of course, Harry Spurl. But you know what? I'm even more interested by people whose records were not their choice. Like, on the other end of the spectrum from the world's tallest man, the world's shortest living adult is India's Jyoti Amge, who is just over 2 feet tall. She's an adult. Or, how'd you like to be the guy with the world's longest nose? That is 3.46 inches. I mean, I guess if you had that record, I guess it'd be kind of cool that you could say you had the biggest nose, but the rest of the time you'd just be kind of stuck with it, right? You might get a little self-conscious about it if you were that guy. There's probably difficulties associated with having the world's longest nose. You might get a lot of stares. You might feel sometimes like a little bit of an outcast. You might wish you could just have a regular old schnoz sometimes. Well, in this series, Dinners with Jesus, we've been going through the different times that Jesus eats with people, as recorded in the Gospel according to Luke. This time, Jesus meets with a guy named Zacchaeus. His story is told in Luke chapter 19. And the way Luke describes him paints a picture of a guy that not very many people liked. He was an outcast. Now, one reason he was hated was because of his job, and we'll talk about that in a second. But there's another reason he might have felt like an outcast, because as far as I can tell, he is the only guy in the entire Bible who is described as being short. One translation describes him as being little in stature. How'd you like to be that guy? Out of all the thousands of people described in the Bible, you're the short one. He's the owner of that particular Guinness record. The only guy in the Bible described as being short, or for whom his lack of height caused a notable problem. But if you grew up going to church, especially if you went to kids programming, there's a pretty good chance you know all about Zacchaeus, because there is a little song that has been sung by generations of preschool church kids that tells the first part of Zacchaeus' story. But I know that there are lots of us who did not grow up singing this song, so just so that we're on this page, here is a video from several years ago of my youngest daughter, Lily, when she was 4 years old, singing Zacchaeus.
Zacchaeus was a wee man, and a wee man was he. Climbed up in a sycamore tree, and what he wanted to see passed that way. He looked up in a tree and he said, Zacchaeus, you come down, 'cause I go into your house today. 'Cause I go into your house today. Yeah.
So who was this Zacchaeus? Well, we're going to read the first few verses from Luke 19, and then we'll talk about it. Jesus entered Jericho and made his way through the town. There was a man there named Zacchaeus. He was the chief tax collector in the region, and he had become very rich. He tried to get a look at Jesus, but he was too short to see over the crowd. Okay, so the first thing Luke tells us about Zacchaeus is that he was the region's chief tax collector. Now, we've talked about tax collectors in here before, but just in case you missed that one, in that time and place, tax collectors were Jewish people who worked for the hated, occupying Roman government. Their job was to collect taxes for the Romans from their fellow Jews. Their own income came from the surplus of the taxes that they raised. If they were rich, as Zacchaeus was, it meant they were getting rich from overcharging people on their taxes. They were seen by other Jewish people as sellouts and traitors, and they were lumped in with the worst kinds of sinners. I mean, they were the scum of the earth in the opinion of upstanding Jewish society. And Zacchaeus, he ain't just any old tax collector. He is the chief tax collector. He's at the top of the tax collecting pyramid. Like other tax collectors paid him money. So he cheated people and he benefited from others cheating people. Not only that, he was short. How short was he? We don't know. He was wee. He was a wee little man, like in the song. He was at least short enough that he could not see over a crowd of people. So probably at least like a head shorter than the norm. Now, the Bible doesn't tell us how Zacchaeus felt about his shortness. And I do want to be careful not to read too much into this story. But often people who are significantly physically different from whatever their society considers normal can also deal with emotional baggage because of it. They're different. And that can make them feel like an outsider. And I know some of you know very well what I'm talking about. So I don't know for sure, but I think it's possible that may have had something to do with some of Zacchaeus' decisions. So he already feels like an outcast, so why not go the whole way and become a chief tax collector who takes advantage of people for his own profit and to benefit the Roman Empire. He got rich doing it, but I'm guessing he was also pretty lonely and possibly guilt-stricken. There are some things money cannot buy, like peace of mind, belonging, hope. And then he hears that Jesus of Nazareth is going to pass through his town of Jericho. Now, he's obviously heard of Jesus. Most people in Judea have by this point. And Zacchaeus is desperate to see him. Like maybe he will see Jesus perform some kind of miracle. Like right before this story, Jesus has just healed a blind man right outside of town. Or maybe Zacchaeus has heard the rumors that Jesus often hangs out with sinners, even tax collectors. He treats them like people. He gives them hope. There's even a former tax collector in Jesus' little group that he travels with. We talked about him like a month and a half ago. His name was Levi or Matthew. Zacchaeus might have known him. Zacchaeus wants to even just catch a glimpse of Jesus. But there's tons of people around, and he's just so short. So what's he do? Well, this short, wealthy chief tax collector that nobody likes climbs a tree. Verse 4, so he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. Now, in that song that I used to sing as a kid, we used to kind of shout that part. Kids always added shouting in all those songs. Zacchaeus, you come down! And it made it sound kind of stern, like Jesus was yelling at him. I don't know if that was Jesus' actual tone of voice or not. I imagine he said it kind of with a little smile on his face. And he was amused by the sight of this chief tax collector up in a tree. But he said, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. I must. Zacchaeus didn't know it yet, but Jesus had a divine appointment with him. Zacchaeus was just hoping to catch a glimpse of him, and now Jesus is going to be his house guest. Verse 6, so he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, he has gone to be the guest of a sinner. But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. Man, I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall when Jesus had dinner with Zacchaeus. Like, what did they talk about? What did Jesus say to him? Now, what we do know is that there were a bunch of people outside who were just appalled that Jesus would choose to eat with this guy, that he'd enjoy the hospitality of this sellout, this traitor, this sinner. Surely there were worthier people in town for Jesus to hang out with. But while we don't know what was said at dinner, we do know the effect of it. Zacchaeus was a different person. Jesus was profoundly changing his life for the better. Zacchaeus got up in front of everyone. Hey, stand up, Zacchaeus. Can't see you. And he said, I'm giving half my possessions to the poor. And if I've cheated anyone, I will pay them back 4 times the amount. This was way beyond what the law required for someone who had cheated others. It was over the top. This was not the reluctant response of a guilty and condemned scumbag. This is the genuine and generous response of a repentant heart. Because, as Jesus said, today salvation has come to this house. That's what happens when we truly encounter Jesus. He changes us. Because of the love and grace and mercy that Jesus had shown him, Zacchaeus was a changed man. No longer alone, no longer an outcast. And Jesus said, this man too is a son of Abraham. He is part of the family, not just the Jewish family, the family of God. Yeah, there might have been more deserving people in Jericho that day that Jesus could have spent his time with. People who were nicer or more religious, better liked. But Jesus' mission was, as he said, to seek and to save the lost. So what does all that mean to us? Well, Jesus' mission, to seek and save the lost, that's now our mission. It's the mission of the church. Jesus said in a scripture that we read all the time around here, that we call the Great Commission, "Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." God gave his followers a mission to make new and better disciples, to seek and save the lost, to help people discover who Jesus is, why they need him, and how belonging to him and living for him is the only real way to have hope in this life. See, because we're all lost without Jesus. We are lost in our sin, our selfishness, our addictions, our hopelessness. We're all Zacchaeus. We're all outcasts, cut off from God and the family of God. At least we were without Jesus. Now, we may not have felt lost. We may not have been as unpopular or as unliked as Zacchaeus. We may not have experienced the same kind of isolation, loneliness, regret, or maybe we have. Either way, our sin cut us off from God, and we were lost. But Jesus came to seek and to save the lost, and to provide all of us with a hope that lasts for today and all the way into an infinite future. And now it's our job. He's using us in that mission to seek and save the lost. So how do we do it? Well, first, we have to seek. We have to seek out people who need Jesus. If you're a follower of Jesus, that may mean intentionally building relationships with people who are not like you. Something that often happens, not always, but often happens to people who have been Christians for a long time, is that they have fewer and fewer relationships with those who are not Christians. And one day they look around and they're like, well, everybody in my life either already is a Christian or they've made it very clear that they have no interest in Jesus. And if that's true, you may need to put yourself in a position where you can build those relationships. I mean, it can happen lots of different ways, through your neighborhoods, through work, through your hobbies, through your kids, your family members, whatever. In fact, following the example of Jesus, I suggest deliberately looking for the outcast. Now, I do not mean going up to somebody and being like, hey, you kind of seem like an outcast, but can you think of anyone, or even like groups of people who maybe feel a little bit of that isolation for one reason or another? I mean, perhaps they're older people who don't get around much anymore, kind of stuck at home. Maybe there are those who deal with some kind of physical challenge, sickness, disability. Maybe there are those who deal with some kind of financial hardship, and that is a limiting factor for them. Maybe there are people who are isolated due to circumstances beyond their control, or maybe, like Zacchaeus, by decisions that were well within their control. Maybe they've made some poor choices in life. Maybe they're even incarcerated. And loneliness is one of the consequences they're dealing with. But as I was thinking about this, I thought, we live in one of the fastest growing communities in the whole country. Last I heard, Sarasota Bradenton was number 2 in the nation in population growth. People are moving into this place all the time. I heard on the news something like 1,000 people a day. And many of them don't really know anybody here. They have no family, no friends nearby. That's an opportunity. Maybe we could find a way to welcome them, to help them to feel part of this community. Now, some people are more open to that than others. I know, I've experienced that too. But we can do our part. Like, just one way to do that is to invite them to things like our glow-in-the-dark egg hunt coming up March 31st. Something fun they can do as a family, help them build relationships with others in the community. Also, in this immediate area, just right here, like in Lakewood Ranch, we all know there are a lot of people who have a lot of money, right? Jesus said it's hard for a rich person to enter God's kingdom. And why is that? Well, I think it's because people with money, they think they have it all together. They have everything they need. They don't think they need God. They're good. They're just fine on their own. But when you really get to know them, when you talk to them, you find out they're not just fine on their own. They deal with stuff just like everybody else. Many of them are lonely. Many of them have major family issues, sin issues, just like everybody else. And most of all, they need the love and hope and forgiveness that only Jesus can provide. Zacchaeus was a rich man. He probably would have lived in the Lakewood Ranch of Jericho. But he needed Jesus. Now, some people you meet may happen to already follow Jesus. That's great. If they're looking for a church, man, we'd love for them to come be a part of what God is doing here. On the other hand, if they don't yet know Jesus, or they're not actively following him, maybe God can use you and us to introduce them to Jesus. And that's the second step. So we seek out people who need Jesus, and then we introduce them to Jesus. And we do that in a couple of ways. One is to act like Jesus. We're welcoming, we're generous, we're kind. We stand up for the vulnerable and the disadvantaged. We're full of love and joy and peace. If God's Spirit is in you, and if you've been born again into Jesus, he is, then let that fact show. Find ways to serve others, to show them that they're important and valuable. In 2 Corinthians 5, Paul says that we are Christ's ambassadors, or his representatives. So we need to represent him well. Now, we won't do that perfectly, of course. We're not Jesus. We're going to make mistakes. When we do, we have to own up to it. But we have to represent Jesus. Many of us, right, have had experiences with people who say they're Christians, but whose actions and attitudes don't remind us very much of Jesus. About a year ago, our house was nearing completion, and Jen and I were shopping for some furniture. The lady who ended up selling us our couch, we actually talked to her for quite a long time about Jesus and about spiritual things, church. She had some church in her background, but she kind of gave it up long ago. One of the things she told us was that all of her co-workers there at the furniture store who claimed to be Christians or were church people were some of the meanest, most backstabbing people she'd ever met. That's how she felt about it. How does that reflect on Jesus? As we build relationships with people who don't know Jesus, and even just when we're interacting with people in the world, talking to servers and people behind desks and restaurant employees, we must remember who we are as followers of Jesus and whose we are. Because if not, why would they listen to a word we say? By the power of God's Spirit within us, We have to act like Jesus, show Jesus to this world. But you know what? That is not enough. It's not enough to just act like him. We also have to talk about him, to share our faith in Jesus with words, like out loud. There's a famous quote that's it's been attributed to a guy named St. Francis of Assisi, although a lot of people don't think he actually said it. But you've probably heard it. It goes like this: preach the gospel. If necessary, use words. You might have heard that before. And, I think the idea that they're trying to communicate in that quote is that what we were just talking about. Followers of Jesus are supposed to point people to him with their whole lives. And I agree with that. But you know what? Sometimes people use that philosophy as an excuse to not talk about Jesus. Because talking about Jesus is a lot scarier sometimes. And so they think that lets them off the hook. I can just try to be a good Christian. Just be the best person I can be. Love people well. And they'll eventually be able to tell that I'm a follower of Jesus. And they think that's enough. It's not enough. And one of the reasons it's not enough is because that can send the message that it's about us, that we are really good people, rather than people who are saved and transformed by the grace of Jesus. But we're going to let people down because we are still sinners who are in the process of being made holy by God's Spirit. You know who won't let people down? Jesus. Jesus won't let people down. So we introduce people to Jesus by talking about Jesus, by telling our Jesus stories. Has Jesus made a difference in your life? If so, tell people about it. If not, let's talk about that, okay? But if he has, tell people, before Jesus, I was this. Then I met Jesus. Now I'm this. Like Zacchaeus could have said, before Jesus, I was rich. I had all the possessions I wanted. But I got there by cheating people, and I was an outcast. I was lonely. But then I met Jesus. He had dinner at my house. And nowadays, I'm not as rich in terms of money, but I have something far more valuable. I am loved and accepted and forgiven, and I have a generous heart. He is changing me every day. What's your Jesus story? How has Jesus changed you? Even if you were brought up as a Christian like I was, you have a Jesus story. What's the difference that Jesus has made in your life? So know what your story is and be prepared to tell it. Studies show that a significant majority of non-religious people, self-identified non-religious people, would be willing to listen to a trusted friend talk about their belief in Jesus. Not go to church. They may not have much use for Christianity per se, but they would listen to you. So introduce them to Jesus through your life and through your words, because Jesus changes lives. This is not a bait and switch. You don't pretend to care about someone so that they'll eventually become a Christian. Like Jesus didn't pretend to care about Zacchaeus. And you know what? People respond all kinds of different ways when we talk about Jesus. They may initially not want to hear what you have to say about Jesus. And if that's true, you can still be friends, still continue the relationship. And maybe it'll just take a really long time before they are receptive, until the circumstances in their life bring them to that point. Or they trust you enough. And it might never happen. But that does not mean that you have wasted your time. People didn't always respond positively to Jesus either. Jesus is not a product we're trying to sell. And we don't try to coerce or manipulate people into believing in Jesus. Like, bad things happen when people try to do that. But our salvation that we have in Jesus is a precious gift. And it's not something we should keep to ourselves. The nature of the gift demands that those who have received it tell everyone they can how they can receive it too. Like whenever my kids get a gift they're really excited about for their birthday or Christmas or whatever, they want to tell everybody. The night we got our puppy, like we called like our entire family, all the different branches, some of our friends. I mean, they wanted to tell everybody. Good gifts are meant to be shared. Think about it. If you are a Christian today, it's probably, I'm going to say, very likely because someone or multiple someones introduced you to Jesus. A parent, another family member, a close friend. And that made all the difference to you. So let's be that for someone else. Let's share that. Let's seek and save the lost. Seeking relationships with people who don't know Jesus. And then introducing them to Jesus through our words and our actions. And I can say, no exaggeration, no hyperbole, doing that will make an eternal difference. Eternal difference for someone. And if you're listening to this today and you're not sure about this Jesus yet, I'm really glad you're listening. I hope you keep exploring this. I would love to talk with you more about it, or maybe even better, talk to the Jesus followers in your life, people you already trust. Jesus provides hope that no one else can. Jesus came for the outcast, like me, and each one of us.